Okay, starting. This is Pathwork Guide Lecture number 185, Mutuality, a Cosmic Principle in Law. And it was channeled October 9th, 1970 by Eva Paracas. And this is a 1996 edition, so there's many versions and many ways of the different lectures, but they all contain, this basic wisdom. So this one particularly I find relevant in so much of the work that we're doing, whether it's with our close relationships, whether it's our internal relationship with ourself, which is way more, important than we often understand and realize. And then also this kind of how the relationships are and between, parties and nations and groups of people right now, and all of this conflict and splitting and things. So I think this is a beautiful lecture to offer at this point. Okay, and so yeah, feel free to chime in and make comments or questions here, and I'll just begin going through the lecture. The guide says, "Greetings, my friends. Blessings and love for every one of you. The topic of tonight's lecture is mutuality. Mutuality is a cosmic principle and law. I will divide the subject into three sections. The first deals with mutuality as a cosmic principle and law. The second deals with how this law manifests in human life. And the third deals with the nature and origin of those hindrances which disturb the law of mutuality." And in some ways, this is a good breakdown, of how he works with all of the lectures, right? From the cosmic to the interpersonal to the, um, obstruction kinds of things. So, mutuality is a cosmic or spiritual law. No creation can take place unless mutuality exists. Mutuality means that two apparently or superficially different entities or aspects move toward one another for the purpose of uniting and making one comprehensive whole. They open up toward one another and cooperate with and affect one another to create a new divine manifestation. New forms of self-expression can only come into being when the self merges with something beyond itself. Mutuality is the movement that bridges the gap between duality and unity. Wherever there is separation, mutuality must come into being in order to eliminate this separation. So, this, I find, this is such an important principle, and in my own life right now, we're coming together with the trying to do this creative thing with this land and with mutuality with each other, and of course conflicts come up, and all of that. And so it's a good lecture, I think, right now for me as well, and just trying to see the real truth of that willingness, right, to open and be in mutuality is such an important piece. And of course, whenever we do that, as the guide speaks of later on in this lecture, it's like all of our own inner splits are going to kind of show up. So there's a way that it's a very powerful purification agent. And I was talking to one of the members in the LLC that's part of this enterprise recently, and was saying, like it's hard to explain to people, when we come into community or we do something together as a group. You think of the positive vision, which is really important, the inspiration and all of that, but you don't really realize how much that is going to bring out all of our places of difficulty within us, and so it's hard to explain to people that they're going to encounter that, but it really is natural to the process, right? And part of the way that being in community heals and purifies us. I think there's a way in which we can not be fully growing to our full capacity, let's say, or challenging, or if we're isolating, or just staying with people that everybody we agree with, and that kind of thing. So it's very beautiful to have a kind of larger synergistic perspective in all of this. So he says that, let me repeat, mutuality is a cosmic or spiritual law, and no creation can take place unless mutuality exists. Mutuality means that two apparently or superficially different entities or aspects move toward one another for the purpose of uniting and making one comprehensive whole. And it feels like a synergy to me in a way, and they open up toward one another and cooperate with and affect one another to create a new divine manifestation. So, new forms of self expression can only come into being when the self merges with something beyond itself. Mutuality is the movement that bridges the gap between duality and unity. And also, I mean, that, when he says new forms of self expression can only come into being when the self merges with something beyond itself, reminds me of a picture in one of Brian Swimm's Canticle of the Cosmos of the child's face lit up in wonder, and like it's that mutuality with the outer, with the other, right? With the presence of something beyond oneself that really does allow then for new forms of self-expression, right? And when we're in relationship, and with each other, like maybe in Eros, I think we often have had that experience of being with somebody that is attractive to us, and we kind of are attracted to them. They call out of us sort of our best self, or our new parts of ourself that we didn't ever really realize was there, right? If we can be relaxed and spontaneous, every interaction can evoke new creative expression within us. And so this is part of the play of the universe, and the beauty of pleasure in relating that can happen. Um,
Yeah,
and
I
so,
think
go ahead. Yeah,
can I jump in?
yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
uh, I think this is partially the pull and the push that I've experienced in my life because it brings out both this intense pleasure and connection and these strong and beautiful aspects of my own psyche and my own nature. And at the same time, I find that sometimes I don't like what comes up, right? I don't like feeling a certain fear or competitiveness or pettiness or uh, those kinds of things. So I yeah, you're totally right that it does uh, allow all those things to bubble up. I do think that in some way, if we're sitting in a cave by ourselves, we'd still be going through some process of change, and some things would be opening up to us, but certainly would be a much slower process if we were not around one another. And Darlene, I do have in about 30 seconds, this is the drop zone, and I'm going to lose
Okay,
you for about a minute.
all right. Let me see if I can pause the recording here for a second. Okay, I'm pausing now. Okay, so want to welcome Frank with us and resuming our study. I'm not quite sure where we closed. So we're basically talking about how nothing can be created unless mutuality exists, be it a new galaxy, a work of art, a good relationship between human beings. Oh, yeah, and we were talking about how in relationship, how new avenues of expression and new, like it kind of evokes parts of us that we may not have even known were, part of who we were, right? So relationship is this beautiful thing that, and we were also talking about how it also evokes, our trauma and our kind of dynamics, and that it's this huge, intense cauldron for healing all of that as well. So, but back to sort of the cosmic level, he's saying to take, for example, this idea that the object must be formed in the mind, right? We have to conceive of something before we can create it. And so without the creative inspiration and imagination by which the mind extends beyond itself, its previous awareness of what already exists, not even a plan can be formed. This creative aspect must then cooperate with the second aspect of mutuality, which is namely execution, which implies labor, effort, perseverance, and self discipline. Unless the creative idea and all those activities which are more mechanical and ego determined work together in harmony, the object cannot be created. The first aspect, creative thinking and inspiration, can never complete creation unless the second aspect of execution is brought to bear on the venture. This applies without exception to everything. Whether you create an object, compose a symphony, paint a picture, write a novel, cook a meal, search for new scientific discoveries, heal illnesses, create mutual love, develop on the path of self realization. This law of mutuality applies to all endeavors, all successful completion, and all meaningful self expression. So he says the creative attitude is a free flowing, spontaneous manifestation. Execution is an act that comes through the determination of the ego will. It is more mechanical and laborious, requiring consistency and effort. It has uh, different characteristics from the spontaneous, effortless influx of creative ideas. So human beings are uncreative for two reasons. Either they are unwilling to adopt the necessary self-discipline to follow through on their creative ideas, or they are emotionally and spiritually too contracted to open their own individual creative channels. In the first case, they childishly refuse to be bothered by the difficulties, the trials and errors, and in the second case, they lack inspiration. So I was sharing a little bit before, the process for me in creativity on lots of levels. And I really find, it's like almost the inspiration comes in, and that's so wonderful. And then, there's so much follow through. I feel like right now I'm a little bit overwhelmed with all of the new, creation and inspiration, and how to, actually, do it all and get it grounded. And, but I can tell you that there is, I think the critical element is the willingness, right? And then also, it's been interesting to just kind of sort of keep trusting in the mutuality with some larger flow and process that's happening, right? So I often find, I'm booked, and all of a sudden people are call and cancel, and so time frees up, or I feel like I'm not getting anywhere and I'm spinning my wheels and there's all kinds of distractions, and then the next moment I hit another place in the stream of life and everything kind of flows together and all falls together. I think we were having, recently like a major sort of retrograde of many, many planets, and they're starting to slowly move forward again. Although I think there's also a lot of, strong intensity in our upcoming times, according to the star charts. So, but it's kind of like we're receiving inspiration, maybe even from the stars, right? As that, and then we have to bring it into actuality.
Well, Darlene, how do you feel about your musical creative process? I mean, from my observation, because I've watched you and I've been present when you've delivered your hymns, okay? From my observation, it's like, okay, I know that there was a moment when Darlene wrote the hymn, sat down with her guitar, and actually created an accompaniment to the hymn. But then there's also that moment when you deliver the hymn, and of course, many times over and over again. It's like there's always a creative moment when you perform it. Um, so
Yeah, yeah.
that in that moment, there's this moment of like mutual creativity when the people that you're with have to be willing to accept what you're ready to deliver, you
Uh,
know? I know this from my
exactly. Be
own
open
performing.
and yeah,
Yeah, I
exactly.
know this from my own performing.
Exactly. I was going to say, yeah, this is coming
Yeah,
out of
so
your
there's
directions.
and there's a whole like it's not like you don't do that against the will of the moment. You do that like only if you feel that the people are ready to receive your deliverance, you know? So
Yeah, and sometimes it's not always clear, but yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
subtle.
No.
It's very subtle and more intricate than the guide actually is kind of saying here. And really,
Yeah, I mean, I think he gets into a little more of that, sort of how the yes current has to, the two yes currents have to come
yeah,
together in
yeah,
this lecture. And I think that's a part of what you're sort of speaking to,
yeah,
right? So, but
yeah,
yeah, there is a kind of receptivity, absolutely, in the mutuality, right? With the giving and the receiving too. And we've been working with, some of
yeah,
the lectures on that. So,
yeah.
okay, so anybody else? So he's saying, did I move past? He's saying, so an imbalance of the two aspects of creation is striking in the area of human relationships. So creative, spontaneous, effortless experience that initially brings two people together in attraction and love occurs all the time. Yet this connection is rarely maintained. All sorts of explanations are given for this, yet what mostly happens is that the labor of working out the inner dissensions is neglected. The childish idea prevails that once the initial act has taken place, the self is powerless to determine the course of the relationship. Usually the relationship is treated as if it were a separate entity that either favorably or unfavorably runs its own course. So I don't know if that resonates for anybody. I kind of get his point, but I definitely see what he talks about. Where the eros kind of brings us together, and the guide talks about this. I think in Love, Eros, and Sex, where without that eros magnet, right? We would probably never come together in mutuality. So it's kind of like sort of the bridge to mutuality that as humans we have, but then it is a whole other level, then to maintain that or to keep it deepening and stuff. So, and in some ways, I find that the pathwork is a beautiful, instruction about all of that. So, the whole universe consists of the harmonious mutual interplay between effortless creative imagination and execution, which always requires labor, investment, commitment, and self discipline. This bridge of mutuality is a very important aspect of unity and creation. Mutuality is not the same as the unified principle itself, which is opposed to the dualistic principle. The difference between the unified principle and the principle of mutuality is that the principle of mutuality leads to unification and is actually the movement toward it. It is not yet unification itself. For mutuality to operate, there must be an expansive, reciprocal movement toward another attitude, aspect, or person. Two expansive movements must flow out toward one another in a harmonious interplay of giving and receiving, of mutual cooperation, of positive opening. This means that, in fact, two yes currents must move toward each other. The ability to accept, bear, and sustain pleasure can be increased in human beings only gradually. And I think he's kind of just jumped to that because I think, those it's very scary for us to have those two yes currents move toward each other. There's a way that in its own level is really scary to us, right? To accept, bear, and sustain the pleasure that is hard for us. So he says this ability depends directly on the person's integration and wholeness. Hence, mutuality depends on the entity's ability to say yes when a yes is offered.
Mm. It's like I don't know, what comes to mind is like the the ultimate mutuality would be the constant yes current coming from God, so to speak, and the human being constantly trying to respond to this yes current, which might actually also be called the um, current, the
Right.
cosmic love current in the universe that says yes to everything good, you know, yes, says yes to life. Um, the human being says yes to life and is like willing to like take the risk, the biggest risk.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, it's like it's we are human, and so, then we can also say yes to our no's, right? But then there's this way that we can not identify totally with the no, and then we can, help it evolve, right? And
Sometimes I get the idea that humanity is like a gigantic experiment that the spirit world or God was like, you know what? Well, this is the best I can come up with. Let's see if this works. you know, I mean, otherwise it would have to be an exact divine plan, and how could that possibly be?
yeah, that would be, we have to have free will. So it is this, yeah, this, larger, movement, that
Yeah.
allows ourselves to learn, how to choose
Yeah.
what's, what's our deepest truth, right? And our deepest love. And we have to learn that by trial and error, and it can take some time, but yeah, it's kind of like sort of guaranteed. That's sort of the plan of salvation, is it's supposedly in enough time, we can learn it.
Well, I mean, but like in terms of an experiment, maybe it's like maybe
Maybe God
humanity.
isn't so sure we're going to make it either.
Yeah, humanity might not be the best vehicle to save a soul, because after all, we're continually going off course, getting deeper and deeper and just deeper and deeper distracted by our distortions and
Don't you think, though, that that's a way that this is, it has to come into consciousness. Like everything that is unconscious is not in the light and cannot be seen and chosen, so that like we have to demonstrate it, we have to manifest it, we have to see what's there and then choose, right?
we
It's
have to
that's our free will,
manifest the distortions before we can even recognize them and
and make the
determine that
choice.
they're not the right path.
Right, right.
Interesting.
That's my sense.
Yeah.
And so it is all necessary, like what's happening in a way. It's kind of like a big giant global core class, right? But it triggers me, it gets me scared. It's like all of this stuff is pretty awful. And then I also watch myself, even, I mean, this working in community, and that's where the rubber really hits the road, is in our relationships, in our individual, personal, communities and stuff, and how easily it is for, us to, even with the best of intentions, have conflict and go into projection and, lots of different, pain states, right? Suffering and conflict that's not. So, it's a deep study, and I think mutuality is sort of like really the cutting edge of what humanity is trying to, learn now, because we can't go on sort of in this totally separated, individuated ego state. We have to individuate and come back together again now. And so the pressure is on for, you know, clearing anything that blocks that, right? Bringing it into the light, and those that, are learning can choose, and hopefully, everybody's choosing, and free will is sacrosanct. So even if you choose something else, that's not judgment against, it's just that there's, I think, a different process then for learning for that entity to continue.
Yeah.
and those that are ready to, the earth is kind of at a place where she's finished this this level of her development, and so is moving forward. And so some of us, hopefully, this is how I see it. Who the heck knows? But that there's certain of us that are ready and calling for this and joining with her in that, and then there are others that are still, going through their natural progression of development, right, as souls. And there really are different ages of souls and soul development processes. So, but who knows where we're going? But I do know that it's like this beautiful sort of dance, and where, I mean, even when people are, at the end of life or whatever, the thing that breaks through is the preciousness of the close relationships of the places where we've had mutuality in life, and so this is really a pearl. This is or a diamond, or like something that we want to recognize fully, and really try to apply. And again, like I said, he talks about how we have to bring it into our own intra personal relationship within ourselves, which is kind of the first step, and how I've experienced it as well. I think that's really important, and where a lot of the work gets derailed is it doesn't happen at that level.
Well, I didn't read the lecture, and when you talk about intra personal, what exactly does the guide mean by that?
He didn't
Intra.
use that term himself, but he's talking about that we have splits within ourselves, and we can't resolve and go into mutuality outside of ourselves until we can be in mutuality
You're talking about
within.
the parts of our personality
Yeah,
becoming
with all of our
mutually
different parts, right? We
becoming
have to.
mutually okay, yeah. Okay, I get that.
And that's where oftentimes it's very subtle, and we don't realize that we're not in mutuality with all of our parts in some one way or another.
No, right. Yeah.
So yeah, so let's see, it's maybe not too far down here, so good comments. So says this brings us to the second section of the lecture. How does the principle of mutuality apply to humanity's present state of development? With respect to mutuality, humanity's development can be determined by three gradations. The human being who's least developed and still full of fear and misconception is able to expand very little, since expansion and mutuality are interdependent. Mutuality is impossible on this level to the degree that expansion is denied. And I don't know, maybe you can recognize, even though most of you are capable of, some some expansion, when I'm regressed, when I'm in my trauma, state, I can feel, that energy of, contraction and fear of expansion, so there's this sort of, it's good to sort of recognize it in our own energy systems in a way, and how we hold. I think in core energetics, we also learn a little bit about expansion and contraction of energy, and how we have, on one level we're trying to learn how to compassionately hold things. On another level, we have all of the defenses that are basically forms of holding to control things, right? So we hold up, we hold in, we hold back, we hold out, we hold together, you know and all of these holdings are contraction states that block mutuality. So when we're in a defense in some way, that expansion is not possible. And while most of us are, capable of, more mutuality in general, there are times when we're in relationship where we feel that same contraction. So all human beings are afraid of opening up to some degree, as you well know. At the beginning of doing this inner work, you may not have suspected that such a fear existed in you. You erroneously thought that there was something especially wrong with you, something that no other valuable human being shared. Therefore, no one must be allowed to suspect this flaw in you. But as you went on, you learned to fully admit, accept, and properly understand the universality of this problem of yours. So does that make sense in your own experience of your work and your path? Have you seen those, the way that the work can move like that, where you're hiding and afraid, and judging yourself in some way, and 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 then you discover that you bring it out, in group or in some, and everybody kind of relates, right? They don't shame you for it necessarily, right?
Right,
And
right.
and you begin to sort of see, oh no, everybody gets this, and this kind of self-revealing, is part of that mutuality. The guide says it's so critical for us to, connect. And so when we're hiding behind our masks and our fears of, you know that we won't be accepted, there's usually some, place inside of us that is also not accepting ourselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Jacob.
Oh, thank you. It makes it feel less separate, right? That's the together bringing kind of process where you're exposing this place where you felt so different and so bad or so unlike others, or others couldn't possibly understand, and just the process of kind of this exposure
Right.
starts um, challenging that, and is a direct contradiction that you are so different and others wouldn't possibly understand, and that's that
Right.
mutuality that kind of wakes up that darkness, or that sense of um, I am so different. Yeah, and I've certainly had those experiences myself, so I can totally relate.
Yeah, it does, and it takes a risk, and those experiences really help. They still probably, I mean, there's still this way, right? Like we begin to open to that, but there is still, like this inner dynamics that I think still kind of holds it. So, like until we feel okay with all parts of ourself, others accepting us helps, right? And often is a huge relief. But we also have to work with the parts in us that have still rejection or, uh, our own self-judgment about these things, because it's like there's certain things that we can't, we can receive from people some of that, and accept some of their, understanding and love. But until we deeply understand and embrace ourselves right there, we will not receive all of what we could receive from them. And vice versa, give back, And so there's this kind of way that I think we have a beginning of mutuality, but oftentimes it could go deeper.
It's like we couldn't, if we can't accept our own imperfection, then we can't accept the imperfection in someone else. And we project that attitude. When people disappoint us, we project the attitude that, you should be more perfect.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it is, like all of the,
But it's
sort
really
of,
what we're saying is we're saying, I'm disappointed in myself because I'm not as perfect as I expect you to be. It's crazy. It's like crazy making psychology, but it's what we do.
exactly. Yeah, it is. It's really a source of deep suffering that we don't always recognize because we're oblivious to the fact that it's going on. So, and the greatest, healing, I think, is more like an awakening just to that, right? Uh, in some ways, awakening is usually used to awakening to sort of the unified consciousness, but I think awakening can also be applied to really the awakening to what's going on in the deep unconscious more as well.
Yeah. Sometimes I spend a lot of thought on trying to or feel into the vastness of the spiritual cosmos in terms of like my place in it. It's like, because I like, it's like I want to be special, but But how can I be special when I'm just a little grain of sand in this enormous spiritual complexity, you know?
Among a billion other grains of sand, but each
Yeah.
grain of sand is completely equal and completely necessary.
Yes.
It's all a part of a larger, unified organism. And so without your part of it, even though it's a very small part, it wouldn't be complete. And you are, like special in that way, right? But you're not any more valuable or important than any other grain of sand. And so by that you are, very small and humble.
Yeah. And this part of me sort of believes that, if I could just dissolve into the vastness of it, I would really experience it even more.
Mm.
Instead of remaining like in this place of where, oh, I understand, I'm special, I understand, you know. I would rather be like just a blowing on the wind and feeling that
Yeah.
than to be
It's-
thinking I understand it.
Right.
Do you know what I
Exactly.
mean?
No, it is like a way of experiencing life in this expanded mutuality that is nothing but pure flow and joy, right? But it's a state that one has to work to achieve, and comes through all of this work. And I don't know that anybody, at least I don't always maintain it, but it's like it's definitely experiential, process that, you can see, oh, yes, that's what we've been wanting and going for all this time, and for the longest time, fighting against ourselves, frustrated with ourselves because we knew somehow deep down that there was some of this, deep pleasure that we were missing, right? But we didn't know how to find it. And so, and it's very counterintuitive how to find it, right? It's like, so it's a deep journey that we're all on, and yeah, the more that we can, see and just awaken to what all these forces are inside of us, and be curious, right? And observe what's going on within us, and then align with our like intention or our longing or our, you know, uh, desire for mutuality, and we got into some conflicts among the people in the LLC recently, right? And so, you have to say, I mean, the tendency when you get mad at each other is, well, fuck you, I'm gonna, separate, or
What's the
I'm cutting
LOC?
you off, huh?
What's LOC?
Oh, I'm sorry, the Forest Gardens group, we've
Oh,
got, this 50 acres, and we got like 8 people that are involved in and
are they
doing
all
all of it. Yeah, yeah.
investors, paid
And so we're
investors?
trying to find mutuality to
Right.
co-create this
Mhm.
whole place, right? But then, of course, all of this, the projections and the old childhood wounds come out with each other as we get more intimate, right? And it's easy to get into conflict and, projection, and so then we end up, actually, kind of, I mean, it's fine to separate, but for temporary, but when people get so negatively affected and they start, holding that negative place, then the yes current that you need for mutuality is no longer there, right? And so we have to call ourselves back to, that yes current to go forward. And everybody has to do the work inside, to clear whatever is the resistance they might have now to saying yes, whatever the issue that's up for them. Then that allows everything to evolve and heal. It's how community and life heal us, right? So, it says, after diligent work, many of you are now able to acknowledge your fear of opening up and expanding. You may at times be quite aware of this fear and see how you hold back your energy, your feelings, your vital forces, because you believe yourself to be safer through the control you exert when you are contracted.
Mm.
So feel that in your own experience too. Sometimes in fights and stuff, we have like sort of, sometimes that's a good one that we go to. And to the degree that this holds true, there's this problem with mutuality. And it feels safer, somehow to, be in control and contract against our own expression in that moment, and we justify, well, because if we said it, it would just make it worse or whatever. And it's certainly discernment, and there are boundaries, that are appropriate, but, to see like what the guide is saying. Usually we're holding back because there's some lower self energy in it, right? And so if we don't move it out in some way, safely, someplace, consciously, then we get to, just not recognize our own lower self, and we don't do the healing, we don't do the transformation.
Well, though, I have to say that speaking from my personal life in the moment, I think a lot of my contracting is like a guard against chaos. The energy of the people, some of the people in my life, is chaotic, and I'm like, no, I don't want that chaotic energy to infiltrate my life. Uh,
So but here's where I think, and this is, I mean, for it's kind of like anything that's painful, we tend to contract against until we discover that actually those things are less painful if we can open in compassion, right? So if we get the heart, we have to defend unless the heart, and the heart is the actual more powerful, defender in some way, and actually, the energy of, like the moving forth in, compassion for ourselves, compassion for the situation, compassion with that person, allows it to be the chaos to be there without needing to contract against it and without getting overwhelmed by it, right? Because you're still in this holding
yeah,
space.
I know there is a space like that. I know there
Good.
is.
Yeah. Yeah.
I know that because I've actually experienced that space.
Yeah. Yeah. I
I've
know
been
you
in a
have.
place where I knew that all the energy around me was chaotic, yet I was um, perfectly okay with it. You know, yeah.
And these things again, my experience is, um, we just need to feel some of what we could not feel before, right? When so as a child, that was your trauma, right? It was all that chaos. And now you have a bigger container, and it's like there's some of it like kind of stuck inside or stored inside of our vehicle in a way that we had to, contract against and hold inside of ourselves. And so in some ways, I think that the times now in the later parts of our life that are triggering that feeling, and I mean, believe, it's unconscious, we can't stop that feeling, right? It's going to come up. We're going to feel the fear and the pain and the discomfort of that, chaotic feeling. But if we can just breathe it and feel it and be with it, right, when it's there, and kind of tolerate it, and that I think there is a way that there's something in that actually is transforming it, and actually is allowing, it needs conscious presence to be with it in order to change the frequency of it and to release it, is sort of how I'm understanding it. So so sometimes I think, oh, here this is, and why am I feeling this again? But it's like the answer that usually comes to me is, this needs to be held and felt for a while, right? And it's not, you don't have to resist it. You don't have to judge yourself for it. It's not, there's nothing bad happening. It's what is needed here in this moment. And it's a part of the transformation and healing process that you signed up for. So, um, breathe and trust and feel God holding you, open your heart and compassion to yourself and the suffering inside of yourself, as well as the, in others or whatever. And then we can actually, I think, move these chunks of pain states out of the field of the earth now. So, however, when development proceeds a little more, this is our longing for mutuality becomes stronger and more conscious, and there are many degrees and many alternatives. But speaking for the sake of clarity, people who are in the second stage are the ones who are willing to open up but are still afraid of doing so when an opportunity arises for actual mutuality. So the only way the bliss and pleasure of expansion and union is experienced for people at this stage is in fantasy. And this leads to a common and frequent fluctuation. Such people are convinced that their strong longing indicates their actual readiness for a real mutuality. After all, they experience it so beautifully in their fantasies. They still do not experience it in reality. That they do not experience it in reality is ascribed to their lack of luck in meeting the proper partner with whom they could realize these fantasies. When a partner finally appears, the old fear is still rampant. The soul movements contract and the fantasy cannot be realized. This is usually explained away by all sorts of outer circumstances, which may even be true. The partner may actually have too many obstructions to help them realize the dream. Yet, does this very fact not indicate that some deeper force must be at work in the person's psyche that makes sure to attract the partner with whom the contraction appears justified? Right? So he's speaking again here how, we really are co-creating all of this, and there's a mutuality in our negative interactions as well as in our positive creations. For the deeper self always knows where a person stands. If the willingness is still lacking to face the deeper issues in truth, subterfuges and excuses are necessary for the preservation of the ego. But failure in the relationship always indicates that the self is not yet ready to put true mutuality into practice. Many people continue to go alternatively through periods of aloneness and acute longing, then temporary fulfillment of a sort, in which either outer or inner obstructions prevent full mutuality. The consequent disappointments may lend even more justification to unconscious fears, which feed the determination not to open up and be carried by the stream of life. The pain and the confusion are often very profound in people trapped at this stage. But this pain and confusion will eventually lead to the full commitment to recognize the real inner source of this fluctuation. The meaning of this stage is rarely understood. The pain and confusion are there because the fluctuation's true significance is not recognized. When a growing person comes to see that periods of aloneness afford him or her some opportunity to open up in comparative safety and to experience, even though vicariously, some manner of fulfillment without taking the necessary risks, he or she has indeed made a substantial step towards self-realization. Concomitantly, when he or she recognizes the true underlying significance of the difficulties encountered during the times of tentative relationship, the same holds true. So that's fairly convoluted. I'm not sure I can even, but I think he clarifies a little bit down below. So alternating periods of aloneness and relating have their own built-in safety valves. Each preserves the self in its separate state and simultaneously helps it venture out to the extent the entity has become ready to come out of separation. So again, there's this kind of larger trust in the sort of plan of salvation and the way that God has things arranged and the laws of things and how they work. And so, again, the ego mind says, oh, maybe there's something wrong with that or something wrong when I get hurt in that. But if we can kind of trust again in allowing, it was what Frank was saying in the beginning, what is, trust the truth of what is arising and not think that we need to control it, then that surrender really can take us through into another place as well. So at one point on the road of individual evolution, everyone comes to recognize fully how painful the fluctuation is, and that subsequently leads to a commitment to be open to mutuality and fulfillment, to interplay and expansion, to cooperation and positive pleasure, right? And so this is kind of where free will and choice, we may not be able to fully manifest it all the time, right? But we get, oh, that's what we want, and there's a part of us blocking it, and so it's kind of like deep inside, even though we haven't, released all our blocks yet or whatever, we can still make that conscious choice. Yes, I want that. Pray for that. Ask for that. Choose that, right? And that is really what spirit needs from us, right? To then set in motion everything that will take us there. So this always requires sort of the relinquishing of the negative pleasure and the pseudo safety. The soul then becomes ready to learn, experiment, risk mutuality, love, pleasure, and to function safely in an open state. And then at the third stage, people are relatively capable of sustaining actual mutuality. Needless to say, all steady relationships on earth do not indicate real mutuality, right? Most relationships are formed with other motives, or else the original motivation of mutuality was given up when it could not be maintained and other motives replaced it. So let us now come to the third and perhaps most important part of this lecture. What are the obstacles prohibiting mutuality between two human beings? Usually this is explained, and quite accurately in part, by the problems human beings have. Yet this does not really say enough. Mutuality can exist only to the degree that the individuals involved know about and are in contact with the evil of their previously hidden destructive side. So, and it's interesting he uses the word evil here. I don't quite, I think he's referring more to the personal lower self, right? And there's other ways when he uses evil in slightly different ways, and also in the negative intentionality, right? So, he's saying basically that we need to know and be in contact with these usually denied and repressed sides of ourself, right? So once again, we have to, be willing to see all of ourself. And so because we're not, there's a rift between the conscious striving for goodness, love, and decency, and the unconscious that, first is bent on destructiveness, hate, negation, and then also is hiding that, right? So that where mutuality cannot take place. And I emphasize here that mutuality is not absent because the evil aspects are still there, but because awareness of them is lacking. This is an all-important distinction. Usually human beings approach this problem in precisely the opposite way. They believe that they must first eradicate the still existing evil, for otherwise they are undeserving of the bliss that comes from mutuality. The negativity in themselves is too frightening to be acknowledged, so that the rift between the conscious awareness of self and the unconscious denial of self widens as life goes on. If you are alienated from your own unconscious, you must act out what deep in yourself you know exists within you. You act it out with another person and affect the similarly unconscious and concealed level of that other person. So this is, like we really need to see, like whenever there is conflict, it is mutual. It is totally mutual. And the way to get out of it is to, like really look at our part. He says, unless this key is applied, relationship must falter or become stale, and mutuality in the true sense cannot unfold. Therefore, it is crucial for you to gain increasing contact with the unconscious destructive aspects of your being. We have had precisely this aim ever since we started working on this path, and yet how very difficult it seems for the individual to bridge the gap between the conscious good and the unconscious evil. How much struggle everyone puts up, and how many people are tempted to leave this pursuit altogether because it seems too painful and difficult to accept previously unacceptable aspects of themselves. Yet life cannot be truly lived unless this happens. And this, in this I want to say too, like hear the word evil, part of what we previously are, or what we're not accepting, might be, our true vulnerability, right? So, like there's a way in which when we are constricting things and rejecting and not accepting, like we think these are truly unacceptable, but oftentimes, all of those things have some positive aspect, some needed and necessary part. And we need to like kind of recover the treasure in each of those, the truth behind it, the higher self behind it, that the guide talks about in another lecture. So your inner split must reappear, and this is where he goes into, I think this very important realization here. So
Darlene, can I
yeah, go ahead,
chime
Jacob,
in?
jump in.
I
Yes,
have a
absolutely.
question. So I'm just trying to kind of relate it to an actual life example. Some of this just feels unattainable unless I see it and feel it in my own
Sure,
life.
absolutely.
So let's say me and my partner are having an argument, and let's say my partner's trigger is about something that used to happen in her childhood about being overridden or not seen. And so she's having a strong reaction to that, where I may have a small degree of that, maybe, or maybe it wasn't even intended that way at all. That was not the reason I was saying no, or I was, deciding. So our clash there wouldn't be uh, about the same thing, but it could show, or it would show, I guess, um, something in me that's reacting to something in my partner. Or is the guide suggesting that the reason that my partner is having a reaction in the first place has on some level something to do with something that I am already contributing, something that is already happening between us that is enticing this clash?
I think in each instance, I mean, there's different levels of projection, but I would say for you, the key here, like, when she reacts, do you react to her reaction?
Okay, so it's the first one that I said.
If
Yeah,
if you
so
don't, I mean, if you
yes.
don't recognize how you contributed, right? You can stay innocent and you can stay open-hearted with her,
Sure.
and it may de-escalate it, right? But if you go into a reaction against her reaction, now you are mutually co-creating the conflict.
Right, right. So me being kind of judgmental or being defensive against her reaction, or saying or you shouldn't see me like that, or feeling, my ego feeling hurt or something like that, that would kind of highlight my need to grow, my limitations, right? But it
Right.
doesn't necessarily imply that from the get-go we were both
I
make
mean, there's a way that this unconscious stuff, you are her good enemy, so she needs you to trigger that in her, because that's how it's going to heal inside of her, you
mm,
know. It's like, so, if like in some ways you probably do what she's saying, but it's probably much more subtle than she experiences it, because it's like it's always that case, right? She's reacting out of old trauma with this. And so in the, thing, like the guide says, yeah, we have some element of what they're reacting to. We always do. And it's good for us to own that, no matter how
sure,
small it is.
sure. Yeah, and I would say that I do. It's just that it's not in every situation that, is being projected or claimed. And so, or
And that can happen,
yeah,
right? But if you are truly innocent, then stay innocent.
right, right. Don't get into
That
a
this is
battle,
where,
right?
you don't need to go to war. There's no conflict, you just stand your ground, your truth. This is where, usually if it's we feel like we have to argue, there's a kind of way that now we're projecting our inner authority out onto them, right? We have to get them to agree. And if we
Hmm.
know wait a minute, that came out of the blue. I was innocent, but we still can open in compassion and recognize in mutuality, oh, this is that sensitive place for her. Let me hold her and see what is needed, in a mutual kind of way, right? And not have to react and run away or set a boundary, or if that's the case, then you need to see, what am I afraid of, because this is where she's trying to heal you, right? This is where
Yeah.
she's your good enemy, and she's bringing up your unconscious, and that needs for you to work it. It's beautiful that she's bringing it up.
Yeah, this is good stuff to keep coming back to, because in the moment, I mean, there's some awareness that I have now that I don't get locked into certain dynamics, but in the moment when the energy is high, or there's some kind of sense of threat or something, that stuff comes up. Like, just my body starts feeling defensive.
Exactly,
There's
and
some
that's
kind of
the
threat
unconscious
when
in me,
there's
right?
threat in
Yeah.
the room.
And so there's where your trauma still lives in your body and in your unconscious. And if you can not make it about her stopping doing that so you don't have to feel it, instead embrace, oh, this is here for me to feel. Let me go in and explore it and hold it and re-educate it and heal this adaptation, this unconscious, feel, it's the energy inside of us, right? And so we can be with it, and then it can heal.
Yeah, thank you.
And it does take a while, because it initially knocks us unconscious, right? It's like we have somebody react to us, and we go into reaction, and we lose awareness, and then we wake up down the road, oh, where have I been, but and that's important too, because then we usually try to go to defend ourselves or something in that moment. If we can just say, whoops, I got reactive too. Let me go explore it. Let me see who this was inside of me that, felt a need to defend, right? Or felt traumatized in this moment, and go in and hold that part myself. So good. Is that anything more?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. So if I'm not sure where I stopped, but if you are alienated from your own unconscious, you must act out what deep in yourself you know exists within you. You act it out with another person and affect the similarly unconscious and concealed level of that other person. Unless this key is applied, relationships must falter or become stale, and mutuality in the true sense cannot unfold. It is crucial for you to gain increasing contact with the unconscious destructive aspects of your being. We have had this aim. Oh, yeah. Okay. So, how much struggle everyone puts up, and how many people are tempted to leave this pursuit altogether because it seems too painful and difficult to accept previously unacceptable aspects of themselves. And here's where the key is, right? Because all of this is about facing what we already have rejected and deemed unacceptable. And that is kind of like the ground zero of the problem. So your inner split must reappear as a split between you and others unless you are fully conscious of your own self. Becoming conscious is beginning to mend the rift, consciously diminishing the rift. Consciousness must eventually lead to acceptance of what was previously denied. If there is no mutuality between you and all the aspects of yourself, because your standards, your demands, your expectations of yourself are unrealistic, it is absolutely unthinkable that mutuality between you and others can ever exist. Mutuality between you and yourself is absent when you reject the evil within you, and you may not even reject it consciously, right? You may just deny it, right? Rejecting evil, you ignore and deny the vital, original, creative energy that is contained in all evil. This energy must be made available to you in order to become whole. The energy can only be transformed when you are aware of its distorted form. Yet when you reject its present manifestation, how can you reconvert it? Hence you remain split within yourself And when the split is not conscious, the split mirrors itself in your relationships or the lack of them. No matter how evil and unacceptable any specific traits in you may be, no matter how undesirable and destructive in you or the other person, right? Because again, we may not even see this as our shadow in some ways. And so if we can't stand it in the other person, there's something going on, right? So you could probably include, unacceptable. If you're seeing it in them, you need to look in yourself. Where is the split functioning inside of me? And it may be slightly a different way, but it's connected. And so only as a whole person can you sustain pleasure. Only as a fully conscious person can you be whole. Only then can you not block the expansive movement and let yourself flow out into the universe of another entity, while remaining open to receive the other's outflowing energy currents and soul movements. And I think, I don't know if you can kind of experience, that sort of it's freedom, right? But if you can, like that, again, feel inside of yourself, oh, I have to just let myself be spontaneous, and whatever comes out of me is going to show up out there, right? And maybe it won't be as perfect as I want, or maybe I'll have an emotional reaction, that will make me look weak, or make me look bullying, or whatever, bad in some way, right? So there's this kind of fear that we're always holding back, because of that. And this is where I think humility, self-acceptance, because then that, especially if we're willing to really take responsibility also where something hurtful comes out, lower self does show up, like that we can risk having the freedom to be spontaneous. And of course, when we are in our reaction place, and when we are in our judgment and our, anger and our hatred and our self, then we hold back, and justify and kind of argue within ourselves, because we can't let that movement happen. And that's a part of our inner conscious holding us back, saying, no, it's like that's not appropriate. So I'm not suggesting that we just go blast that stuff out, but it is, to recognize, okay, so there's something here for me to go explore. So your disunity with yourself cannot bring unity with others. It is utter folly to expect it. And so you do not have to wait to become totally unified first. If you take your ongoing relationships and use them as yardsticks by which you gauge where your own inner split is and where you stand in your willingness to accept the negative in you, you will grow into greater self-acceptance. Simultaneously, your ability to have mutuality will grow in proportion to your self-acceptance. Hence, your relationships will improve and become much more deeply meaningful. The acceptance of whatever in you has been rejected, because you refuse to become conscious of it, will immediately produce a greater acceptance and understanding of other people you have to deal with. Mutuality will then become possible. By the same token, if you cannot accept the evil in you, thinking in effect, I must first be perfect before I can accept, love, trust, esteem myself, you must express an identical attitude toward the other person. When the reality dawns on you that he or she is far from perfect, you reject the other person just as you keep rejecting your own self. The difference is that you manage most of the time to not know that you are doing it with yourself. This is very unfortunate. You manage not to see this rejection of the imperfect self and of the other for what it is. There are always handy explanations destined to get you away from seeing how you reject the unpalpable reality of yourself and others, and how this causes a rift in you that makes mutuality and bliss impossible. So there are people feeling sort of that place where, we go into rejection of self or others as a kind of energetic state of separation, right? Rejection, it's like, can we bring it, like Jacob was saying, into specific examples or into our real lives? I see it a lot in people in sessions, right? How they're, always rejecting themselves in various situations, right? So I think it may be, you guys have done some more work, so maybe it's not so frequent, but I think it's kind of like within us all to a pretty strong degree still, so worth exploring. All of you can use what I say here as a very practical and immediate key in your inner work. You can look at all your relationships with your family, your partners, your associates, your friends, your business acquaintances. Look at any life situation where you may be involved with others. Look closely at those relationships if anything troubles you about them. To what degree are you truly open to the reality of the other person? If you honestly answer this question, and you can see that you are not open, you can then use this key for yourself. Of course, you can easily shirk from seeing it by busying yourself with explanations, justifications, rationalizations, and even with your acute self-blame, which may easily be confused with self-acceptance, but is just as far removed from it as is overt self-denial. You know perfectly well in your mind that you and others are far from perfect, and you pay lip service to this truth. But do you really accept it in your heart of hearts? When you attempt to answer this question on the deeper emotional levels, you will see that in many instances the willingness is very small. Your reactions prove contrary to what you know in your mind. As you slowly discover your intolerance, your criticalness, your refusal to accept others for what they are, you can automatically know that you do exactly the same with yourself. Now, it is even difficult to accept the projected, acted out negativity of others, which always involves the use of a defense that is more destructive than whatever they defend against in themselves. Like, it's very tricky to receive people's negative energies, right, without going into defense. So, again, it's not that we have to do it perfectly, right? You may react, but it's kind of like when and as soon as one can wake up that they're, in a trauma trance and, in a defense and in a, way of lack of mutuality, of contraction, of judgment, then we can begin to slowly bring ourselves back, right, to do the work. Yeah. It's a kind of trauma trance, right? And we get lost in it. So forgive yourself and then do the work. So your inability to cope with this acted out destructive behavior of others, of yourself towards you, again reflects your lack of awareness of when and how you are doing the same thing, though perhaps in a different way. It is easier to first see your reactions against others. If you can use those reactions as indicators, it will be much easier for you to discover what you are doing to yourself. The harm you inflict upon yourself by the negation of the unacceptable part causes you to do precisely what I mentioned before. It makes you use subterfuges destined to cover up the unacceptable. Yet these subterfuges are more unacceptable than whatever you originally negated. If you are in shallow, unsatisfactory relationships which lack depth, gratification, and intimacy, where you reveal yourself only superficially, perhaps only revealing your idealized self-image, which you think is the only acceptable part of you, again, you will have a good gauge of where you are within yourself. You are not even taking a chance because you are unable to accept yourself. Hence, you cannot believe that your true, genuine self can ever be accepted, nor can you accept others for where they are in their present state of development. All this excludes mutuality. The movement of opening up and taking in the relaxed bliss of streaming into another energetic field and accepting the emanation of the other energy field, this bliss is unbearable and appears dangerous for those who hate themselves. When you contract after every temporary opening, you can realize that this does not happen because you are evil and do not deserve the bliss, but because you cannot accept the totality of forces and energies as they exist in you now. Therefore, you remain locked in the contractions and cannot convert them into expansions. So the principle of mutuality must first be applied to the relationship between you and your inner self. Only then can it be extended to your relationship with others. But let me say here, my friends, from the vantage point of a higher degree of consciousness, that all the separateness that appears so real in your realm is as much an illusion as the separateness between your two selves. By closing your eyes and your consciousness to the total person you happen to be at this stage, you create these apparent two selves, the acceptable and the unacceptable. But in reality, they are not two entities. They are both you, whether or not you choose to know this now. The same illusion prevails about all apparently separate entities. Here, too, the separation is an arbitrary, artificial construct of the mind, as it were. In reality, such a division does not exist. This may not be easy for you to feel at this stage, but the fact remains that human beings live in this overall illusion of separateness, which is the cause of pain and struggle. In reality, all is one, and every entity is connected with everything else in the universe. And this is not merely a figure of speech. One consciousness permeates the universe and everything therein. But you can begin to experience the unity only when there is no longer any part of yourself that is excluded, denied, or split off. And then there's a couple of Q&As. Any comments or questions here? I think I just want to reiterate, how true I have found. Again, it's sometimes not always clear, what we judge in others to see it in ourselves, or, but there is this, deep split that we have within ourselves, and as we heal that, and again, it's like it's always kind of both and, right? We have more beauty and pleasure in relationship and capacity for mutuality, and then as that happens, we have more healing, right? But I think it has to really, the part that we can do for ourselves most deeply, if we can wake up and recognize it, is this real holding of the traumatized parts of us. And usually those are the ones that we've rejected in some way, and those are the ones that we reject in others, right? And that's what needs to be held. It's trauma. And trauma and adaptation to trauma. And the ego wants to judge it, and it's understandable because it's not always pleasant, or but if we can understand that it's just people's wounds, and hold them, and hold ourselves in the woundedness, and in the place of the hurting. So Q&A. Can you discuss the aspects of mutuality on the physical, mental, and spiritual levels from the energetic points of view? From the energetic point of view, the expanding movement is an outgoing and outflowing movement. When two separate human beings open up toward one another in mutuality, able to accept an open flow without contracting, the energy from one interpenetrates the energy field of the other, and vice versa. It is a constant inner flow and exchange. It is otherwise with the people who remain separate, who contract and cannot open up to mutuality. Two such people remain enclosed, each like an island, with little or no energy being exchanged. When exchange of energy is blocked, the great evolutionary plan is delayed. In the case where a person can open only when there is no chance of mutuality, or when a yes current must be met with a no current because mutuality still seems too frightening, one energy flow streams out but reverberates and bounces back, thrown back by the closed energy field of the other. This phenomenon can easily be observed in the everyday life of people. They either always fall in love when it is not reciprocated, or for apparently unfathomable reasons they fall out of love when their partner has deep feelings. To a more subtle degree, the same principle exists in ongoing relationships. When one person is open, the other is closed, and vice versa. Only steady development and growth changes this so that both learn to remain open to one another. On the spiritual and emotional levels, the lowest stage indicates an acute state of fear. The fear of accepting the self in its present stage is essentially the same fear that wants to run away from true mutuality and bliss. Since the fear is there, hate must also come into being with all its derivatives. The mental levels are affected by this process of avoidance when a person seeks ready explanations for what cannot be understood unless the self is accepted for what it is now. So, when things happen, and we don't like it, we don't accept it, the mental activity becomes so busy that it cannot attune to the higher voices within the self, to the deeper truths of the universe. So our defense internally and all of our justifications and you know dialogues inside with people and all of that, this is all just kind of wasted energy in some ways. Mental noise creates more disconnection from the feelings and from the state that first created this condition. And again, this is kind of like a strong unconscious reaction, and I have found one of the best things that I know that can help me drop out of that mental craziness is to disconnect, like just bring my awareness into my body, into the energy, into the feeling state rather than the thought state, right? And sometimes it takes coming back several times, but that actually will usually make a difference, and then I can be with and hold and work with all of that feeling stuff, and then I am there receptive and listening, and present to all of the voices of the guidance and the help that is with me. So in the second stage, where alternate opening up and contracting occurs, the mental activity of the person is confused. Search and groping cannot yield truthful answers as long as the self is not accepted with its very worst. And I don't know, if other people have, I had a long journey with my own self-hatred, right? And my own lack of acceptance of who I was, because I felt, and it wasn't all of who I was, but, so many of the traumatized parts and the younger parts of me that didn't seem to want to, you know, allow me to, fulfill my desires, my heart's longing, my mission, whatever, and so it felt like they turned against me and I turned against it, and so there's been a lot of time in that struggle. And so again, this, self-acceptance piece. So, the faulty interpretations, which are supposed to explain why we're always, like the other person, or I'm not, able to, only increase frustration. And so again, the mental, trying to figure it out, right? Um, this indicates, let's see, I missed something here. On the emotional level, longing and disappointment alternate with fulfillment in fantasy. This indicates some degree of opening and flow, although without real mutuality. Withdrawal and contraction also include anger and hate, disappointment and blaming. And even, like there was one of the members in my community that, was kind of like, I don't know, recreating my mother for me is actually what was happening. And I think I was also recreating somebody for him. But there was this sort of ghosting and this tension between us, and like I could feel like, this energy, that the blaming, the anger, the hate, this, and so it took about a day, to really keep going and working with that, and I would put it, work and deepen and, find truth and release, feeling and, like energy around it. And then, there would still be like a tendril or another piece to go. And so, oftentimes, clearing the stuff, is it's such a help when we do it and we don't just kind of sit and stew in it forever. But it also takes some dedication and practice with it. So when self-acceptance makes mutuality possible and energy is exchanged, the universal movements flow evenly. The healthy alternation of the expanding, contracting, and static principles prevail, where individuals find themselves in the eternal rhythm, harmonious with the universe. So be blessed, my dearest ones. May this lecture again be a little light going on inside yourself, giving you hope and strength, showing you from yet another side the way, and leading you more strongly toward accepting yourself exactly as you are now. May you not indulge in anything nor excuse it, but see it for what it is. Accept the imperfection fully, neither embellishing it nor exaggerating it, so that you cringe with shame and fear. Or justify it, blame it on the other person, right? All these distortions must disappear, for they are pitfalls, much more disastrous than whatever aspects you hate yourself for. When you find and apply this attitude, you will find your happiness in the truth that unites you with yourself and the universe. Okay. Any final comments? Or I like this lecture.
Yeah, I love the I love the realness that the guide is continuing to point back to, just to be real and just to kind of land wherever you are and kind of in a transparent, naked way. Just look at it without stories, and that will help you see other people more fully and accept them with true love, not the love mask and the shooting love.
Right.
So yeah, I really like this lecture too. Thank you.
Right, good, yeah. And where we are shooting other people or, have that, he really says, we may not be seeing how much we are also doing that to ourselves.
Yeah.
And to, and so we put ourselves under all this unconscious stress and pressure, right? And it blocks that spontaneous flow, that just be yourself kind of um, risking, right? And I don't know if you can think, Jacob, like where, you have a yes current and Natalie has a no current, or where, Natalie, like how, if you think of it in terms of just yes and no currents between you and her, right? And watch, the flux and flow of that from just seeing it in that way, you might discover some things, right?
Hmm.
And feel more responsible, like the guy, you may not always see where your part is, but it may be somehow within that no current um place, or even the anticipation of her, where she's going to go, so that then that flow out is withheld, right? So
Hmm.
yeah. And when
Thank you.
she, I don't know, if she has her yes current, like what happens to yours? So
Yeah. Thank you.
okay. Thank you, everybody. I'm glad you made it, and then we'll do it again in 2, I hope. Take
Thank you,
care.
Okay.
darling.
Good night, everyone.
Night.
Good night.